Dear friends, hearty welcome to today's episode of Online Problem Solving Session series for mathematics students preparing for competitive exams like JAM, GATE, NET, etc., organized by Maths Aspirants WhatsApp groups. As you know, today, February 28th, we are celebrating the National Science Day. I extend my warm greetings to all. In the present session, we will focus on the TIFR GS exam, which is scheduled on March 7. Today, Dr. Rahul Rajan is with us to discuss problems related to TIFR exam. He is presently a visiting fellow at Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore. He had completed MSc and PhD from Cochin University of Science and Technology and BSc from Sacred Heart College, Tevara. I express my gratitude to him for accepting our invitation. I wish that today's session will be really useful for students in their final round preparations. Once again, I welcome all of you to this event and I request Dr. Rahul to handle the session. Thank you all.
Okay, good morning, friends. Today we will discuss some questions on TA for entrance exam. So, TA for entrance exam, mainly two types of questions they will ask. So, there will be multiple choice questions and there will be true or false questions. For none of these questions, you don't have to give explanations for that, and for true or false questions you just have to state whether it is true or false, and for multiple choice questions mostly one answer will be correct and you have to mark that option only. Okay, I think now we'll start doing questions. We'll move on to the first question. The question is, consider the sequences an and bn such that an is given by 2 raised to n plus 3 raised to n whole raised to 1 by n, and bn is like this, given like this, n by summation I equal to 1 to n 1 by ai. Then find the limit of the sequence bn. Okay, so options are here. So the answer is like this. You take A and B a sequence such that A converges to K. Okay, A and B any sequence such that A n converges to K. Now, then it is well known that, or you can easily prove this. Some 1 by n into summation j equal to 1 to n aj. So that means this is the average of first n terms of the sequence A n. This average sequence of averages of first n terms will also converge to K as n tends to infinity. So here an is equal to 2 raised to n plus 3 raised to n all raised to 1 by n. So you can take 3 outside and you can see that using sandwich theorem, that is this is sandwich theorem, that is you can apply this, 1 is less than equal to an, not an, 1 is less than equal to 1 plus 2 by 3 whole raised to n whole raised to 1 by n less than equal to 1 plus 1 whole raised to 1 by n. So applying sandwich theorem, you can see that the sequence an will converge to 3 as n tends to infinity. And hence as an tends to infinity, 1 by n will also converge to 1 by 3 as n tends to infinity. Now you take the average of first n terms of the sequence 1 by n. That is, here you replace aj by 1 by aj. And then you can see 1 by n summation j equal to 1 to n 1 by aj will converge to 1 by 3. And hence you take the reciprocal, you can see that bn converges to 3 as n tends to infinity.
Dx is equal to 1 by 4. Then what is the cardinality of the set? In cardinality of the set, that means what is the cardinality of the set consisting of these type of continuous functions f. Okay. So I'll give some 1 or 2 minutes. You can try. Actually, in this answer, you will get when you can clearly say what is the function. Okay, which type of functions will satisfy, which type of continuous functions will satisfy this condition. You can clearly and you can concretely get what is the function. Yeah, I have got, seen Oh, in the chat box, 2 persons have given the answer. Yeah, they are also given the correct answers. 3 persons have given the correct answers. Yeah, one guy has given the function itself. That's good. So I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a clue. What you have to use. I mean, have you heard of the completing the square? You have to use that. You expand the integrand and apply that completing the square method. That means when you expand the integrand, you will get my f of x minus f of x the whole square. Then you have to complete that. I mean, that's how you can make it as a perfect square. You might have done in the school days. And then you will get an answer. When you get an answer for what is f of x. I repeat, you expand the integrand, that is f of x into 1 minus f of x, and then apply the completing the square or something. You make it a perfect square, I mean adding some extra terms or something, and you'll get an idea. I think I'll explain the answer because a few of them are given the correct answer, so I'll explain the answer. See, so the given is 1 by 4 is equal to integral 0 to 1 f of x into 1 minus f of x. So what I did is, I expanded the bracket, then it will be f of x minus f of x the whole square. Then you add and subtract 1 by 4. Adding and subtracting 1 by 4, you can make this integral into this form. That is minus f of x minus 1 by 2 the whole square plus 1 by 4 dx. Okay. Then this will become like this: 1 by 4 is equal to minus of integral 0 to 1 f of x minus 1 by 2 the whole square dx. And plus, when you are distributing this integrand, plus 1 by 4. The value of this integrand is 1 by 4 itself. The value of this integrand is 1 by 4 itself. So this 1 by 4 and 1 by 4 get cancelled. So the value of this integral 0 to 1 f of x minus 1 by 2 whole square dx will be 0. Okay, and also we know that if g greater than 0 and g is continuous with integral g dx is equal to 0, then g has to be identically 0. This is true for continuous non-negative functions. If that integral value is 0, then that function g has to be identically 0. Here f of x is a continuous function, and hence f of x minus 1 by 2 the whole square has to be a continuous function, and hence this integral equal to 0 means f of x minus 1 by 2 should be identically equal to 0. That means f of x is identically equal to 1 by 2. The only continuous function satisfying this condition is the constant function f of x equal to 1 by 2. So the cardinality of the set is 1. That is, only one function satisfies this condition. So the answer is option B. Okay. Any doubt? Or shall I move to the next question?
Yes.
Okay. So I think this one is clear to you. I mean, you just have to expand it and complete the square, apply the completing the square method, and apply this result. If g greater than 0 and g is continuous with integral g dx equal to 0, then g has to be identically equal to 0. So from that you will get f of x has to be a constant function 1 by 2. Okay, next I'll go to the next question. So you have the next question is, you take a matrix A from set of all take an n-line matrix with complex entries and consider this matrix AA0 AA. So note that this matrix is of order 2n by 2n. So since A is of order n, this matrix will be of order 2n, square matrix. Then this is diagonalizable if and only if. Options are A equal to 0, A equal to 0 means A is the zero matrix. A is equal to I means A is the identity matrix. N is equal to 2. Okay. And D none of the other two. Okay. Okay, again I got some. Is Sangeeta Dara, please again repeat the last part of the previous question. Okay, I want you guys to try this question. I explained this Sangeeta Dara, the last part of the second question we have done. We'll come back. So I hope Sangeeta, you obtained this equation, right? I mean 1 by 4 equal to minus 0 to into this equation you have obtained, and you obtain 0 to 1 f of x minus 1 by 2 equal whole square dx equal to 0. So this integrand, in this equation, the integrand is non-negative because it's a perfect square, right? So this is a known result which you can prove if g is greater than or equal to 0 and g is continuous with integral g dx equal to 0. Then g has to be constant function 0 itself. So here our g is f of x minus 1 by 2 the whole square. So by this result, f of x minus 1 by 2 the whole square has to be a constant function 0. That means f of x minus 1 by 2 has to be a constant function 0. So what does it mean? F of x minus 1 by 2 equal to 0 for all x means f of x is equal to 1 by 2 for all x. That means f of x is the constant function 1 by 2. I hope it is clear. Okay, I'll go to the question. So let A be. So again I got answers. 5 of them have answered it correctly. Question 3. A belongs to Mn of C, then A 0A is diagonalizable if and only if A equal to 0. If and only if, okay. So since some of them have given the answers, I think I will move to the explanation. Okay. So first, what you have to know is, so what is a minimal polynomial? Sorry, what is diagonalizable? I have not written the definition of a diagonalizable matrix. The matrix A is diagonalizable if it is similar to a diagonal matrix. Okay. If the matrix is similar to a diagonal matrix, then the matrix is said to be diagonalizable. Okay, there are many other definitions like if you have a basis of consisting of eigenvectors of A, then A is diagonalizable. Okay, there are other definitions also. But the simpler one is if a matrix is similar to a diagonal matrix, then the matrix is diagonalizable. So this is a well-known result. A is diagonalizable if and only if the minimal polynomial A is of this form. P of x equal to x minus lambda 1 into x minus lambda 2 into etc. up to x minus lambda k. Here note that it's k anyway. You know that every matrix will have n eigenvalues. I mean counting the multiplicities. Okay. So here lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda k are the distinct eigenvalues. Okay. I mean this k can be strictly less than n also. I mean this lambda case can be this any of these lambda is can be repeated. So what I have written is the I have written only the distinct eigenvalues for the matrix A. So I mean, so minimal polynomial is okay. For those who don't know the definition of minimal polynomial, it's only the generator of this set. The set of polynomials Q of x such that Q of A is equal to 0, where A is the matrix. This collection of polynomials will be an ideal in the ring of polynomials. Okay. So since the ring of polynomials is a PID, principal ideal domain, this ideal will have a generator. That generator is known as minimal polynomial. So minimal polynomial is also one more property is there. It should be a monic polynomial. So minimal polynomial is the monic polynomial, which is the generator of this set. So what does that mean? The minimal polynomial is the generator of this set means whenever Q is a polynomial such that Q of A is 0, then P of X, the minimal polynomial, P of X should divide Q of X. That means whenever Q of A is 0, then P of X should divide Q of X. There is one more property. Every eigenvalue of A, each and every eigenvalue of A will be the root of minimal polynomial. Each and every eigenvalue of A will be the root of minimal polynomial, and also every root of minimal polynomial will be the eigenvalues of A. That means P of lambda is equal to 0 if and only if lambda is an eigenvalue of A. Fine? Okay. So minimal polynomial is that generator of the ideal of these polynomials. I mean, these are known as annihilating polynomials for A. Set of all polynomials for which Q of A equal to 0 means they are known as annihilating polynomials of A. P of X, the minimal polynomial P of X is nothing but the generator of this ideal. Note that in usually this minimal polynomial, this can occur like x minus lambda. The multiplicity of each of the eigenvalues can be greater than 1. That means, not eigenvalues, the factors x minus lambda 1 corresponding to the eigenvalue lambda 1. So this multiplicity of these factors can be greater than 1 for each eigenvalue. But whenever it is diagonalizable, the multiplicity of each of these factors, x minus lambda, for each lambda eigenvalue, the multiplicity should be exactly 1. Okay. So if minimal polynomial is of this form, then A is diagonalizable. Fine. So with this you can see that. So with this result, you can see that option B is wrong. Okay. So why? Because if you substitute A is equal to I here, you will get an upper triangular matrix. Fine. You substitute A is equal to I here, you will get an upper triangular matrix. Okay, and diagonal entries are all 1. That means all the eigenvalues of the matrix, this matrix will be 1 with multiplicity 2n. But the minimum, and also the characteristic polynomial is x minus 1 whole raised to 2n. Okay, x minus 1 whole raised to 2n. So if A is equal to I, all the eigenvalues of this 2n by 2n matrix will be 1 with that means multiplicity is 2n. So if A was diagonal, if this matrix was diagonalizable, then the minimal polynomial of this matrix should be, okay, minimal polynomial of this matrix B should be x minus 1. Okay, minimal polynomial of this matrix should be x minus 1. I mean, if x minus 1, if the minimal polynomial is x minus 1, what does that mean? B minus I should be equal to 0. That means B should be the identity matrix. But here B is not identity matrix. It's an upper triangular matrix with which there are non-zero entries in the diagonal part on the upper side of the diagonal matrix. So upper part of the diagonal. So this will lead to a contradiction. So the second option B is wrong. You just apply this result. So A equal to I identity matrix cannot be possible. So we will go further. So not
Sir?
that. Okay, please.
Sir, the minimal polynomial is QX in the note in the PDF.
No. Minimal polynomial I denoted QX I have denoted in the set only. Set of all Q such that Q of A is equal to 0.
So the minimal polynomial is PX.
Yeah, PX is the minimal polynomial.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Okay. So we have X. You consider the block matrix like this: X, Y, 0, Z. Then determinant of C is determinant of X into. Sorry, it is not determinant of Y. Here it is determinant of Z. So typo here. It is not determinant of X into determinant of Z. It is not determinant of Y. It is a typo. determinant of C is determinant of X into determinant of Z, matrix Z. So here our B is A0A. So I am assuming that B is diagonalizable. Okay. Now I am assuming that the matrix B here is diagonalizable, and we'll see what we will obtain. Okay. So anyway, the option B, we got that option B is wrong. So let's see whether now we'll see whether option A is correct or not. Whether the matrix A has to be necessarily a zero matrix. If we get that option correct, then option C will automatically be wrong. Okay, and I will. So note that determinant of C is. So what will be determinant of A? Determinant of A square. You apply this one. So here it is not determinant of I. It is actually determinant of Z. It's a typo. So B is equal to A0A. So determinant of B is determinant of A the whole square. So now what we are going to do is, if B is diagonalizable, we'll try to understand the minimal polynomial of B. If B is diagonalizable, we'll try to understand the minimal polynomial of B. So for that, I will try to find the eigenvalues of B. Okay, I'll try to find the eigenvalues of B. So try to find the eigenvalues of B. The characteristic equation of B is like this: determinant of B minus lambda I equal to 0. So what is determinant of B minus lambda I? It is determinant of A minus lambda n the whole square. Here In denotes the n by n identity matrix. In denotes the identity matrix of order n. So that means determinant of B minus lambda I is equal to determinant of A minus lambda n the whole square. So what does that mean? Eigenvalues, distinct eigenvalues of B and I are the same. Distinct eigenvalues of B and A are the same. Why? Determinant of B minus lambda I is 0 if and only if determinant of A minus lambda In is 0. Fine. So both distinct eigenvalues of both the matrix are the same. Okay. So again I call let lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda k be the distinct eigenvalues. Okay. These distinct eigenvalues are same for B as well as for A, because it is evident from this equation. So again I repeat, determinant of B minus lambda is equal to 0 if and only if determinant of A minus lambda In is 0. So since B is diagonalizable, the minimal polynomial of B should be of this form. Since B is diagonalizable, minimal polynomial of B, so we are assuming that B is diagonalizable. So the minimal polynomial of B should be of this form. So that means B minus lambda 1 into B minus lambda 2, etc. B minus lambda k should be 0. Fine. So I'll compute what is B minus lambda 1 into B minus lambda 2, etc. up to B minus lambda k. So substitute for each of these factors, we will get B minus lambda 1 is A minus lambda 1 In into A minus lambda 1 In, A0, A minus lambda 1 In. And next B minus lambda 2 is like this, etc. up to A minus lambda k In, A0, A minus lambda k In. Now it's a straight, what you have to do is, you just compute this matrix. You just compute the product. It is easy to compute. Okay, that you can do it by yourself. If you compute this product, you will get the matrix of this form. The first 1 by 1 entry would be of this form: A minus lambda 1 In into etc. up to A minus lambda k In. That means the product of k factors. Here it will be the 1 by 2 entry will be A into bracket in the first term in the bracket, that A minus lambda 1 In is missing. All other factors are there. That means A minus lambda 2 into A minus lambda 3 into A minus lambda k In. The second term in the sum is lambda 2 is missing. Lambda 2 is missing. That means A minus lambda 1 In into A minus lambda 3 In, etc. up to A minus lambda k In. You go on like this. Third term will be what? A minus lambda 1 into A minus lambda 2. A minus lambda 3 will be missing. A minus lambda 4, etc. up to A minus lambda k. Going on like this, kth term will be, again the number of terms in the bracket will be k terms. Number of terms in the bracket will be k terms. And the kth term will be product of A minus lambda 1 into a minus lambda 2 etc. up to a minus lambda of k minus 1. Here a minus lambda k is missing. Okay, and the third term will be 0. Fourth term, third term is 2-1th entry. 2-1th entry will be 0. And 2-2 entry will be again the same. 2-2 entry and the diagonal entries are the same. A minus lambda 1 etc. up to a minus lambda k in should be equal to 0. So again note that lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda k etc. are the distinct eigenvalues of A. I already mentioned that distinct eigenvalues of A and B are the same. I repeat, distinct eigenvalues. Okay, the multiplicity of these eigenvalues can change, and since so here you get this matrix is equal to the 0 matrix. Fine, because we have already written B minus lambda. This product is equal to 0 matrix. That means from this you will get A minus lambda 1 in etc. up to A minus lambda k in is equal to the 0 matrix. So what does this mean? Minimal polynomial of A is also of this form. Minimal polynomial of A is also of this form. X minus lambda 1 into x minus lambda 2 etc. up to x minus lambda k. So again I said a distinct eigenvalues of A are lambda 1, lambda 2 etc. lambda k. So what do you get? So if B, this matrix B is diagonalizable, then A has to be diagonalizable. If B is diagonalizable, then A has to be diagonalizable. So now we have to find what is the matrix A. So okay, you see. Okay, now we consider this polynomial Q of x is equal to x into x minus lambda 2 etc. up to x minus lambda k. Here again lambda 1 is missing. Here x minus lambda 1 into lambda x minus lambda 2 is missing. X minus lambda 3 etc. up to x minus lambda k plus etc. X minus lambda 1 into etc. up to x minus lambda k minus 1. So here again lambda term x minus lambda k is missing. So Q of x is a k degree polynomial. So yeah, k degree polynomial as well as the minimal polynomial P of x is also a k degree polynomial because it's of a it has k distinct linear factors. So what does it mean? Q of A is 0. From here, see, this is Q of A, right? This is Q of A for this Q of x. For this Q of x, this is Q of A. And again, we have obtained that this metric Q of A is 0. From here, you have this because this matrix is equal to the 0 matrix, and hence this has to be this Q of A has to be 0. So what does that mean? P of x should divide Q of x. That means Q of x is an annihilating polynomial. The minimal polynomial P of x is a generator of the set of all annihilating polynomials. So P of x should divide Q of x. Okay. So what does that mean? P of x and Q of x has the same roots. Fine. And now you assume A is not the 0 matrix. Okay. So from here you got that P of x divides Q of x. Now you assume that A is not a 0 matrix. Okay. Already we got that A is a diagonalizable matrix. So if A is not the 0 matrix, then the minimal polynomial of A cannot be P of x equal to x. Because for 0 matrix it is diagonalizable, and the minimal polynomial of a 0 matrix is P of x. Or else you can say that A is 0 matrix if and only if the minimal polynomial of the matrix A is P of x equal to x. So what does that mean? Then the minimal polynomial P of x should be of this form, x minus lambda 1 etc. up to x minus lambda k. But here we will get a contradiction. Why? P of x is of this form, right? And P of x should divide this polynomial. That means this polynomial P of x minus lambda 1 into etc. up to x minus lambda k should divide Q of x, which is of this form. See, this P of x minus lambda 1 etc. up to x minus lambda k is of order k, and this Q of x is also of order k. Both these polynomials are monic polynomials, x minus lambda etc. x minus lambda k, as well as this is also monic polynomial. What does that mean? But we have obtained P of x divide Q of x. That means both of them should have same set of roots. See, here lambda 1 is a root, but here lambda 1 is not a root. Again, here lambda 2 is a root, here lambda 2 is not a root. So what does that mean? P of x divided Q of x is a contradiction. So hence, but P of x equal to x divides the matrix Q of x. P of x equal to x divides the matrix, divides the polynomial Q of x, this Q of x. So what does that mean? Already we obtained A is diagonalizable, and hence A has to be the zero matrix. That means if the matrix B is diagonalizable, then A has to be a zero matrix. Since it's so it's a necessary condition. If B is diagonalizable, then A has to be a zero matrix. And if you think of the converse part, if A is zero matrix, then the B is also a zero matrix, then B is diagonalizable. So the correct answer is if that means if this matrix B is diagonalizable, if and only if the matrix A is the zero matrix. Okay, I mean I know this is a long explanation. Any clarification needed? Please let me know.
Sir, sir, why the minimal polynomial cannot be x?
Minimal polynomial cannot be a
X, px. You have said that px is not equal to x.
See, I assume that suppose A is not a zero matrix. Okay, you assume that A is not a zero matrix.
Yes,
okay, if A is not a zero matrix, then minimal polynomial cannot be P of x equal to x. What does it see? I told you roots of lambda is a root of minimal polynomial P if and only if lambda is an eigenvalue. Okay. Then
Yes,
see, since P of x equal to x means only root is 0. The eigenvalues of A is 0. Fine. Again, I have assumed that A is a diagonalizable matrix.
Okay, sir. Okay.
And so then A has to be zero matrix by this condition. So if A is not a zero matrix, this cannot be the minimal polynomial. If this is a minimal polynomial, again we will get A is the zero matrix, provided A is a diagonalizable matrix. We obtained initially that A is a diagonalizable matrix. You can prove it that minimal polynomial A is a zero matrix when only if the minimal polynomial is of this form, P of x equal to x.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So can I move?
Sure, you can.
Okay. So next question is okay. So let T from C. C is the complex set of all complex number and R is a set of all real numbers with a map defined by T of Z is equal to Z plus Z conjugate. What does it mean? T of Z is the 2 times real part of Z. T of Z is nothing but 2 into real part of Z. And for a C vector space V, that means V is a vector space over the field C, field of complex numbers. Now you define the map phi from the set, this set F. What is this set? This set is the space of all C linear functionals on V, and this is the set of all R linear functionals on C. I'll define what is R. So that means F has to be a linear map with respect to Oh, I think I'll give the definition. I think you know the definition of what is C linear and R linear. Okay. Defined by phi of f is equal to T composition F. Fine. Then the map is, which is the correct option, whether it is injective or surjective. I mean, you have to check their properties. What you have to do is, it is actually the map f going to f of x plus f of conjugate. That means you take a C linear map, f map to the real part of 2 times real part of f. To check whether this map is injective, whether it is injective, whether it is surjective, such things you have to check. See, there is a definition of R linear functional. So you consider V as G is R linear functional, means this condition is satisfied. G of x plus y should be G of x plus G of y, and G of kx is equal to k times G of x whenever k belongs to R. So this is the definition of R linear functional. So similarly, C linear functional means, again, this the same set of conditions should be satisfied. That means G of x plus y is equal to G of x plus G of y, and G of k is equal to k times G of x whenever k is a complex number. Instead of R, you have to replace here by C. Then you will get the definition of C linear functional. That instead of R, you have to replace here by C. That's the only difference. Then you will get the definition of a C linear functional. So you try to attempt. So here the map is nothing but the real part of a complex linear functional is mapped to the complex linear functional f should be mapped to its 2 times real part of f. Anyway, real part and imaginary part of a complex linear functional will be a real linear functional. Real part and imaginary part of complex linear functional will be a real linear function. So here the map phi is nothing but mapping a complex linear functional f to 2 times real part of f. So you have to check whether this map is injective and whether this map is surjective. I hope the question is clear. So one guy has given the answer, but the answer is wrong. Again, another guy has given the answer. No, the answer is again wrong. Okay, I think I'll do the question. Okay, I'll do the question. So okay, so let's start with the, okay, what I do is, I have a R linear functional G, okay? I am trying to find whether I can find the complex linear functional f such that G is the real part of f, okay? I am trying to find the complex linear, that means we have to, I am trying to check whether it is this map phi is surjective or not. I am trying to check whether this map phi is surjective or not. Let me check the surjectivity first, okay? So for that, what you have to do, you take a R linear functional G and you have to find the complex linear functional f such that G is the real part of f. Okay, we have to check surjectivity. You have to find an R. You take a R linear function G and try to obtain a complex linear functional f such that real part of f is G. So, okay, let's try that. So let G be a R linear function. Okay, what that means, G satisfies this condition for all x and y belongs to vector space V and for all scalars k, real scalars k. Okay, that means this condition is satisfied. Now consider this function f of x is equal to g of x minus I times g of ix. See, we have taken the vector space V over C, and hence for every x, ix will also belongs to V. Okay, because we have taken the vector space V over C. Okay. Now my claim is this f will be a complex linear functional and the real part of f will be G. This f is a complex linear functional. So what do we have to prove? To prove that f is a complex linear functional, we have to prove f of x plus y is equal to f of x plus f of y, and f of, instead of G, you have to replace by f. Okay, in this here, and f of kx is nothing but k times f of x whenever k belongs to C. Right? We have to prove this for f. That is f of x plus y equal to f of x plus f of y, and f of kx equal to k times f of x whenever k belongs to C. So if f is a complex linear functional, then from this it is evident that real part of f is nothing but G. Okay, from here it is evident that real part of f is nothing but G. So anyway, f of x plus f of y is equal to f of x plus f of y because G satisfies this condition. We have taken G to be a R linear function. So since G satisfies this condition, f will also satisfy this condition. Okay. The only remaining part, whether f of kx equal to k times f of x whenever k belongs to C. Instead of not here, we have to replace R by C. So f of kx equal to k times f of x whenever k belongs to C. So for checking that, it is enough to prove that f of ix equal to I times f of x. Okay. So you have to deduce that from this condition, whether you can deduce this condition for k belongs to C. That you have to do it as an exercise. So the only thing I have to check is f of ix equal to I times f of x. So from this you can prove that f of this condition for f, you can prove this condition for f and complex k. That you can deduce it, that you can do it by yourself. That is, we have to, from this condition, if you prove this condition, f of ix equal to I times f of x, you get f of kx equal to k times f of x whenever k belongs to C. Okay. So now I'll prove this only. Okay. And hence, if you obtain this, then you'll get the map phi is a surjective map. Fine. Okay. First, we have to prove f of ix equal to I times f of x. So from this, since f of x equal to g of x minus I times g of ix, I into f of x will be this. I into f of x will be this. Here g of x is this. Sorry, f of x is defined like this, and hence I into f of x will be I times g of x plus g of ix. So now you compute f of ix. So that means instead of x, here you have to replace it by ix. Okay, instead of f, here x, here you have to replace x by ix. So here g of ix minus I into g of I square x, which is equal to g of ix minus I times g of minus ix. I square is equal to minus 1. So since g is R linear, g of minus x should be equal to minus of g of x. So what do you get? F of ix is nothing but g of ix plus I times g of x. That means f of ix and I times f of x are same. F of ix and I times f of x are the same. So what do you get? F is a linear functional such that real part of f is G. So the map phi is surjective. So what is the pre-image of G? phi, under phi it is nothing but half times f. So because phi maps phi to 2 times real part of f. Phi maps f to 2 times real part of f. So under this map phi, the pre-image of G is half times f. Pre-image of G is half times f. So we get that the map phi is surjective. Now we got that the map phi is surjective. How did we prove? We obtained we took a R linear functional G, and constructed a complex linear functional f like this. Okay. Note that real part of f is nothing but G, and phi maps f to 2 times real part of f. Phi maps f to 2 times real part of f. So under this map phi, the pre-image of G should be the half times f, half times this f. You take half times this f, that means f of x by 2. Then the image of f under phi, will be G, because real part of f is G, and phi maps f to 2 times real part of f. Fine. So the map phi defined by this is surjective. The map phi defined by this is surjective. So now we have to check whether it is injective. Okay. So to show phi is 1 to 1, we have to show like this. Actually, it is okay. F of x plus f of x bar is if f of x plus f of x bar is equal to g of x plus g of x bar. To show phi is injective, we have to show f of x equal to g of x for all x belongs to the vector space V. I am taken f and g from the f and g. Here I am assuming f and g to be complex linear functions. Fine. So what does it mean? If these two quantities are equal, means real part of f and real part of g are same. So from we are assuming this condition, f of x plus f of x conjugate is equal to g of x plus g of x conjugate. From this we get that real part of f and real part of g are same. Why? This is nothing but 2 times real part of f, and this is 2 times real part of g. So clearly real part of f and real part of g are same for all x belongs to V. So now we need to show imaginary part of f and imaginary part of g are the same. Now we need to show imaginary part of f and imaginary part of g are the same. So how will you prove it? We'll prove it. See, what is minus imaginary part of f is nothing but real part of I times f of x. This is we'll get from the usual complex number theory. Minus imaginary part of z is real part of I times z. Since f is complex linear, I times f of x is nothing but f of ix. Okay, I times f of x is nothing but f of ix. Now we have already obtained that real part of f of x equal to real part of g of x for all x. Real part of f of x equal to real part of g of x for all x. Okay, so real part of f of ix should be equal to real part of g of ix. From this condition, and this real part of f of x equal to real part of g of x is true for all x belongs to V. So since g is again complex linear, then you'll get this is equal to real part of I times g of x. Again, this is nothing but minus of imaginary part of g of x. What does that mean? Imaginary part of f of x and imaginary part of g of x is same for all x, as well as real part of f of x and real part of g of x is same for all x. That means f of x should be equal to g of x for all x. That means phi is injective. So the map phi we are discussing is both injective and surjective. That means the map phi is bijective. So this is the interesting part. That means if you have a R linear function G, you can extend it to a complex linear functional. Provided G is an R linear function on a complex vector space, you can extend it to a complex linear functional if you are given a R linear functional G, and such that real part of f is equal to real part of G. So the map phi is bijective. The map phi is bijective. The option and the answer is C. And any doubts, or shall I move forward? Or should I explain it once again, or? Okay, please repeat first part. Okay, so my aim is I have a G R linear functional G. That means I have taken G. I have taken G from this set. So G is an R linear functional, and R linear functional means G of x. The definition is like this: G of x plus y is equal to G of x plus G of y, and G of kx is equal to K times G of x for K belongs to R. So what is the definition of C linear functional? Instead of R, we have to replace it by C. That's all. Here the R, instead of R, you have to replace it by C. So we will get the definition of C linear functional. So this map phi is nothing but this map phi maps f to real part of f, 2 times real part of f, because z plus z conjugate is nothing but 2 times real part of z. This map phi maps f to 2 times real part of f. So here the image of f is 2 times real part of f. So to show its surjective, what I have to show is I'll construct a complex linear function. So what I have taken is I define f of x equal to g of x minus I times g of ix. Okay. So to show f is complex linear functional, okay, the complex linear functional definition is like this: f of x plus y is equal to f of x plus f of y, and f of kx equal to k times f of x whenever k belongs to C, whenever k belongs to C. So anyway, if I am defining f like this, clearly f of x plus y is equal to f of x plus f of y, since G satisfies this condition. That you can easily verify. The only remaining condition is f of kx is equal to k times f of x whenever k belongs to C. So to obtain that, I will prove this part only. To obtain that f of kx equal to k times f of x for k belongs to C, I will prove this equality. That means f of ix equal to I times f of x whenever where I is the square root of minus 1. So what I do from here, this is the definition of f of x. I computed I times f of x. You will get easily, you will just multiply here by I, you will get I into g of x, I square is minus 1. So you will get plus g times I of x. So now next I compute f of ix. F of ix is you replace x by ix. Then you get g of ix is equal to minus I into g of I square x. Okay, because I replaced here x by ix. You replace x by ix. So I square is minus 1. You get g of ix equal to I into g of minus x. So since G is R linear, I can take minus outside. From here I can take minus outside. Then this will become like this: g of ix equal g of ix plus I times g of x. So this is nothing but the I times f of x. So f of ix equal to I times f of x. So now using this, you can prove that f of kx is equal to k times f of x for k belongs to C. That you have to do it as an exercise. It's a very simple exercise. And so f is a complex linear functional, and real part of f is nothing but real part of f is G. That is evident from this. Okay. And what is phi of f? Actually, phi of f is nothing but 2 into g of x. Phi of f is nothing but 2 into g of x. But we want a pre-image for we want the pre-image for G. We want the pre-image for G. So what I take is, I take 1 by 2 into f of x, half times f of x. So real part of, so phi of half time f of x will be G, and hence the map phi is surjective. Okay, now I move to the next question. Okay, before doing this, I want you to, okay, you try this question. Question 10. How many maps phi from n union set 0 to n union set 0 are there with the property that phi of A B is equal to phi of A plus phi of B for all A comma B belongs to n union set 0. The script n is nothing but the set of all natural numbers. You try this question. Am I audible? No response.
Yes, audible. There is no problem. I think.
Okay. So try this question number 10. So since we have done some questions more, I mean, the last two questions were quite lengthy, so I wanted you to do a simple question. So one guy has given the answer. Yeah, one guy has given the correct answer. Anyone else? Aman Pandey has given the correct answer. Yeah, Diya Saha has also given the correct answer. Okay, Lakshmi Rattan, correct answer. So actually, how many functions you can? Okay, I can. Okay, I'll give the answer. Actually, there is only one function satisfying this condition. Only one function satisfying this condition. What you have to do is, okay. See, only one function satisfies this condition. Okay, first I observed is phi of 1 is 0 because phi of 1 is phi of 1 into 1 is equal to phi of 1 plus phi of 1 is equal to 2 times phi of 1. That means phi of 1 is equal to 2 times phi of 1 means what? Phi of 1 is equal to 0. And actually this, okay, you don't have to get this, but you can use this also. You take any A, and phi of A into 0 is nothing but phi of 0. And phi of 0 is equal to phi of A into 0 is equal to phi of A plus phi of 0. That means phi of 0 is equal to phi of A plus phi of 0 for all A. What does it mean? Phi of A is equal to 0 for all A. So phi should be a constant function 0. Okay, phi should be the constant function 0. So only one function satisfies this condition. And so the option is B, finitely many. Okay, next question. So can I move to the next question? I hope that question is clear to you. Fine. Okay, now this question, state true or false. Every non-commutative ring has at least 10 elements. Okay, just tell me whether it is true or false. I told you know that in TAFR they will ask two types of questions, some multiple choice questions, and also they will ask some true or false questions. So Subrata Ghosh has given, okay, anyway, Yeah, it's Subrata Ghosh correct. If your answer is correct. Yeah, Diya Saha correct. Aman Pandey, Lakshmi Rattan. Yeah, your answers are correct.
Rahul, don't mention
Ah,
their answers are correct or not first, so that all of them will try to answer.
oh, okay, fine. I mean, I mean, so many answers, so I thought I should say correct or not. Okay, I won't repeat it. Okay, sir.
So, members, all of you are requested to answer. So, please do
Ah.
share your answers in the through the chat box and make the
Okay,
session if you want.
okay. So, can I give you the answer?
Yes, you need to give only 1 or 2 minutes for the this.
Fine. Okay,
Okay.
so the answer actually it's false. So the example is something like this. Okay.
Somebody
See.
mentioned in chat box. Someone mentioned something. Please have a look on that.
Yes. You are right. We can have a contraction as 2 by 2 matrices. Here the subring of upper triangular matrix is non-commutative. Okay, so here I have given a answer with a non-commutative ring without unity. I have given an example of a non-commutative ring without unity, and its order is 4. Okay, I think Diasa has given answer. I think you should take the matrices over Z2. Upper triangular 2 by 2 matrices over Z2 you have to take. So this is a ring of 2 by 2 matrices over Z2. That's the lower second row is 0 for this matrix. Okay, the second row is 0 for this matrix. So this is a non-commutative ring because you just multiply this. These two matrices, the product of from this you can see that the product is not commutative. So here that R has no unity. Can you think of a non-commutative ring with unity with less than 10 elements? For that, DSR has given a correct answer. That means you take a 2 by 2 upper triangular matrices over Z2. 2 by 2 upper triangular matrices over Z2 over the field Z2. Then you will get a non-commutative ring with unity having 8 elements. You will get a non-commutative ring with unity having 8 elements. So this I have given a non-commutative ring without unity, and its order is 4. So there is also a non-commutative ring with unity having 8 elements. So the statement is false. We have a non-commutative ring with 4 elements, where this is without unity, and with unity you have a non-commutative ring with 8 elements. For that you take upper triangular matrices over Z2. Okay, fine. Now I'll give. Okay, question 9. Let f from R to R be a continuous. Okay, it's okay now. Shall I move to this question? I hope that example is clear to everyone. Okay. So question 9, let f from R to R be a continuous bounded function. Then which of the following are true? F of has to be uniformly continuous. There exists an x belongs to R such that f of x equal to x. Option B. Option C is f cannot be increasing. Option D is limit x tends to infinity, f of x exists. Okay. Okay, some most many they have started to answer. Okay. So many guys have got the answers. Okay, now I think I will move to the explanation part. So first, let me ask. Okay, we'll go option by option. So first option A, it is true or false? Anyone can answer? First option A, f has to be uniformly continuous. Is it true or false? Okay, if it is false, can you try give an example? That is, f is a continuous bounded function, but yeah. So one guy is given the answer. So it is, you can take sine of x square. Okay, f of x equal to sine of x square. Okay, I'll give the, so if you take f of x equal to sine of x square, you will get it is not uniformly continuous. So what about option B? Whether limit x tends to infinity f of x exists? Can you give a counter example if it is false? What about option D? Limit. Same example. Okay, so yeah, you can take to check whether option D is correct or not. You consider f of x equal to sine x. Sine of x is bounded, it's a continuous function, but limit x tends to infinity, sine of x does not exist. So the option D is wrong, and also option A is wrong. Okay, C is also wrong, but you can show it by using graph. I'll give you the example. So the correct answer is option B. That is, there exists an x such that f of x equal to x. So I'll go to the explanation. Okay. See, option A is wrong. What you do? You take f of x equal to sine of x square. And f is not, now this f of x equal to sine of x square is not uniformly continuous. How will you prove it? See, f is, this is a well-known result. F is uniformly continuous if and only if for any sequence xn and yn such that you take two sequences xn and yn and you consider xn minus yn tends to 0. Then f of xn minus f of yn should tend to 0 as n tends to infinity. That is, this is an if and only if condition. F is uniformly continuous if and only if xn, whenever xn minus yn for any two sequences xn and yn with xn minus yn converging to 0, f of xn minus f of y should converge to 0 as n tends to infinity. Here I take xn is equal to square root of 2n pi plus pi by 2 and yn as square root of 2n pi. So here xn minus yn is pi by 2 by square root of 2n pi plus pi by 2 plus 2n pi. And hence this will converge to 0 as n tends to infinity. So obtain two sequences xn and yn such that xn minus yn converging to 0 as n tends to infinity. Fine. So what is sine of x square minus sine of yn square? So sine of x square is sine of 2n pi plus pi by 2 and sine of 2n pi is sine of yn square is sine of 2n pi. So this difference is always 1. For every n, this difference is always 1. And this is a sine of xn square minus sine of yn square is a constant sequence 1 which does not converge to 0. So option A is wrong. That means sine of x square is not a uniformly continuous function. Now we'll we'll think of option B. I told option B is correct. How will you obtain that? Given f of x is a bounded function. So you will find that m such that mod f of x is less than equal to m for all x. That means minus m less than equal to f of x less than equal to m for all x. Fine. Now we consider the function g of x equal to f of x minus x. Since f is bounded, that means f is in this interval, and this x is an increasing function. F of this say this function, say h of x equal to x is an increasing function, and f of x is a bounded function. It lies in this interval only. So you can make this x as big as x. You can take x to be greater than m plus 1 or m whatever, and you can see that g takes both positive and negative values. Why? You take x equal to m plus 1 and you take x equal to say minus m minus 1, something like that. If you take x equal to m plus 1, you will get g to be sorry, if you take if you take okay, anyway, it's a bounded function. Yeah, you can check whether that fx, if you take fx equal to m plus 1, then you will get g as negative function. If you take f of x equal to minus m minus 1 minus of m plus 1, then this g will be positive function. So that means g will take both positive and negative values. So by intermediate value theorem, g of x equal to 0 for x, for some x, because g takes both positive and negative values, and also g is a continuous function. So g has to be 0 at least in one point. So g is equal to 0 means f of x equal to x for at least one x. So option B is correct, and option D is wrong. As I said, you take f of x equal to sin x. No, option C. My option C was whether f cannot be increasing. You just draw a graph, like, think of a graph like this. These are two parallel lines. Okay, this graph is increasing, but this graph is asymptotic to these two parallel lines. That means it will increase, but it will not touch this parallel line. This graph is increasing, but this graph will not touch this parallel line. You can draw it like that, and also f can be increasing. Here also f is a bounded function, but f is also increasing. Okay, so option B is correct. Fine. So can I move to next question? Okay, if it is okay, we can do this question number 8. If you are done, we can do question number 8. Okay. So okay, Sayan Ghosh, sir, option D what? I mean, you want to option D is 36 here, option A is 72, option B is 60, option C is 48, and option D is 36. So here let G be a group and let H and K be two subgroups of G. Okay, G is a finite subgroup. If both H and K have 12 elements, which of the following numbers cannot be the cardinality of the set? The product HK, where HK is equal to small hk is equal to where small h belongs to capital H and small k belongs to capital K. Okay, once again, one guy has asked to explain the previous question answer. So here option D, okay, Sayan Ghosh, option D was to check whether limit x tends to infinity f of x exists. So what I took is I provided a counter example. You take f of x equal to sin x. Sayan Ghosh, you take f of x equal to sin x. See, sin x is a bounded continuous function from R to R, but limit x tends to infinity, f of x does not exist. What you have to do is, you take two sequences. You can take xn is equal to 2n pi plus pi by 2. You can take xn is equal to, you remove the square root, okay? You remove the square root. You can take xn is equal to 2n pi plus pi by 2 and yn is equal to 2n pi. So both xn and yn diverges to infinity, and sine of xn will be 1 and sine of yn will be 0. So what does that mean? Limit x tends to infinity f of x or limit x tends to infinity sine of x does not exist. That means you take xn is now you remove the square root and take. Okay, you take xn is equal to 2n pi plus pi by 2 and y is equal to 2n pi. Then you'll get that. Okay, now we will do this question number 8. Okay, now we'll move to the answer. I hope you have got enough time. So one guy has given the correct answer. Okay. Yeah, not only one guy, more than one guy has given the correct answer. I'll give you the explanation. See, we have order of hk is equal to order of h into order of k divided by order of h intersection k. So from here we'll get order of h intersection k should be equal to order of h into order of k by order of hk. So what does it mean? Order of hk should divide order of h into order of k. And here order of h is equal to order of k and both are equal to 12. So order of hk should divide 144. That means 12 into 12. So order of hk should divide 144, 12 into 12. So from here 72 will divide 144, 60 will not divide 144, 48 and 36 will divide 144. So the only possible option is option B, 60. Why? Because it will not divide order of hk. I mean, order of hk is nothing but 144. So the correct, so option B is correct. That is, order of hk cannot be 60. Fine. Okay, now okay, question number 12. State true or false, or else we can do 11 and 12 and I think we can stop it. By doing 11 and 12, we can stop it. Fine. We'll do question 11 and question 12 and I think we can stop with this and we'll go for discussions. And I have few more questions and with me. So I'll do one thing, I'll send this question as well as answers to Vinod sir. I think he can share it with you. Fine, I don't think.
Okay, that can be done.
Okay, since it's not 12 o'clock, I think we'll do these two questions and we'll go for discussion. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay, you try question number 12. Sorry, first you try 11. Or you can try these two together and just give me the answer. Okay, since we have two questions, I think I can give some 3-4 minutes. You try both the questions, okay? So all the questions which I have done here and which I am with me is I have taken it from previous TIFR question papers. You can go to the website of TIFR. You will get from 2010 onwards, I think. They have given the answers also, but no explanations. But they have given the answers. You can try doing that also. I got the question paper from that site. Okay. In TIFR website, they will give the answers also. No, without explanation, whether they will give the correct option or whether they will say whether it is true or false. But when you prepare, you have to try to find the explanations behind each or correct option or whether it is true or false. So what I feel is the questions are very good because See, I have already shown you that for each some of the few questions, lots of explanation I had to give. So if you are doing these questions, means you can study the subject very well. I feel like that. So I think I'll give the answers now. Okay, fine. So I'll go first. I'll do 11. The 11th, I'll state that the 11th option is the statement is true. So many of them have given the correct answers, and one guy has given the hints also for doing this option 11, both the answers. So, so option. Okay, question 11. See, question 11 is true. The question is, A is a symmetric matrix. Okay, A is a 3x3 real symmetric matrix. So it's a well-known result that every symmetric real matrix A is diagonalizable. So as I already mentioned, A is similar to a diagonal matrix D. So here, so result is like this. If A is a symmetric real matrix, then you'll get a matrix U such that U transpose equal to U transpose U is equal to Y. That means U is an orthogonal matrix. You can find an orthogonal matrix U such that U transpose du is A is equal to U transpose du. U is not U transpose is I. So that means A is similar to D and D is the diagonal matrix. Fine. And note that D is also a real diagonal matrix and diagonal entries of D are nothing but eigenvalues of A. Diagonal entries of D are nothing but eigenvalues of A. So from you will get that the characteristic polynomials of D and characteristic and minimal polynomials of D are same. Okay, characteristic and minimal polynomial of D are same. So here we have given that A raised to 6 is equal to I. And so you take h of x equal to x raised to 6 minus 1 equal. Okay. And from this condition, you can see that h of a is equal to 0. Now you consider let p of x be the minimal polynomial. Since A has eigenvalues, p of x minimal polynomials has roots. And root of a number p lambda is a root of p of x if and only if that number lambda is eigenvalue of A. Okay, and also p of x should divide h of x. Okay, p of x should divide h of x and p of x has roots. Now, since we are considering the matrices over field R, only possible roots of h of x is 1, 9, minus 1. Only possible roots of h of x is 1, 9, minus 1. So what also we know that p of x has roots and p of x divides h of x. Only possible real roots of h of x is 1, 9, minus 1 and p of x has roots and p of x divides 1, 9, minus 1. Sorry, p of x divides h of x. So what does it mean? Only possible roots for P of x is 1, 9, minus 1. I am not saying that roots of P of x is 1, 9, minus 1. Either it can be full 1, either it can be full of minus 1, or 1, 9, minus 1 with some different multiplicities. Okay. So only possible roots of.
We can
Yes.
do just by the simplifying that form, given form, that 8 over 6 equal to I.
Yeah, yes. You can show it like this. Yeah, of course. Because that is also possible. You can factorize x raised to 6 minus 1 and write it as x square minus 1 into this, and you can find it like that also. That is also possible. Yes.
There are
Yes,
also
please.
two possibilities, that a minus I and a plus I. So that product is a square minus I.
Yes. I was trying to say that not only a and minus, a equal to I and a equal to minus I are the only possibilities, but say that you can consider of a diagonal entries with few diagonal entries. You can consider a diagonal matrix with few diagonal entries 1 and other rest of the diagonal entries as minus 1. What you said is correct. Okay. You can do it like that also. It is also correct. But I wanted to explain this in the possibilities of that. So if the roots are only 1, then since A is a diagonalizable matrix, so this D is the identity matrix I. That means only eigenvalue is 1 and the eigenvalues of A and eigenvalues of D are the same. That means D has to be identity matrix, or else A is the matrix, A is the identity matrix. And if the diagonal entries are minus 1, all the eigenvalues are minus 1, then the matrix A has to be minus I, or else it will be a diagonal matrix with diagonal entries 1, 9, minus 1. Okay, the only possible eigenvalues of A are 1 or minus 1. So that means diagonal entries of D are either 1 or minus 1. What does it mean? In any of the case, we have a diagonal matrix with diagonal entries either 1 or minus 1. That means D square should be equal to I. Diagonal matrix with diagonal entries 1 or minus 1 means D square should be equal to I. So now you can consider what is A square equal to U transpose du into U transpose du, which is equal to U transpose D square U. Here D square is equal to I and U transpose U is equal to I. So A square should be equal to I. Okay? Okay, is that okay? Fine. Now the next is whether f of x equal to cos of v of x is uniformly continuous. I think I will not do it, but I will give you it's not uniformly continuous, option is false. You take these two sequences. Xn is equal to log of 2n pi plus pi by 2 and yn is equal to log of 2n pi. I mean, as we did for sine of x square, we have to find two sequences xn and yn. And xn minus yn will converge to 0. And cos of e raised to xn and cos of e raised to minus cos of e raised to yn is equal to 1 for all n, and it's not converged to 0. And cos of e raised to x is not uniformly continuous in R. But this is uniformly continuous in minus infinity 0. Cos of e raised to x is uniformly continuous on minus infinity 0. What I have done is, you take the derivative of cos of e raised to x. Okay, you'll get minus sine of e raised to x into e raised to x. Sine of e raised to x is a bounded function. And also, in this interval, e raised to x will converge to 0 as x tends to minus infinity. So what does it mean? This f dash of x is a bounded function. That means in this interval, the function cos of e raised to x has a bounded derivative. So if you have a function with bounded derivative, then f has to be automatically uniformly continuous. But this xn which I have taken is from open 0 infinity. I have taken from the positive reals or non-negative reals. Cos of e raised to x is not uniformly continuous on non-negative real part, but it is uniformly continuous on negative real part. So if you have a bounded derivative, then f has to be a uniformly continuous function. So hence, cos of e raised to x as a function from R to R is not continuous, but if the domain is minus infinity comma open 0, then it has to be a uniformly continuous function. Okay. So I think I'll stop here. If you have any questions or any queries, you can ask.
Okay, thank you, Rahul. Thank you.
There are few more questions to be done. But if I'll send it. I mean, I have the answers and questions with me. I will send it to Vinod sir, and you can share it.
Okay, we can share through our groups. So
Okay.
thank you, Rahul, for this wonderful class. Now it is a time for discussion. So, dear participants, you can ask any of your questions if you have, or you can ask any. You can comment here if you want. You can ask anything to Rahul. He has completed PhD. Um, in functional analysis in, I think, possibly in the last month from Cochin University of Science and Technology. If you have anything related with PhD or something like that, you can use this opportunity to ask him. He is now a visiting fellow at Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore. So feel free to ask him any of your doubts about mathematics or anything related with PhD or higher studies.
So actually, I have attended TA for under. I mean, I have cleared TA for under section twice, and I have attended the interview twice. Okay, both of my interview was very poor, but at that time I was not that confident. But what I felt is that they will ask you only the basic questions. You do, for in order to prepare for interview, you don't have to study new things. Only thing is that you choose at least two subjects. Maybe, for example, you can choose real analysis and linear algebra. And they will ask, okay, they will start asking you basic questions. One way to do study is you study for entrance as well as you should take some standard textbooks in basic subjects such as real analysis, linear algebra, and try doing the exercises. Mostly they will ask such questions. You will find very good questions in any of the standard textbooks, exercises. You try answering it, and then you will get an idea of how to prepare for interviews. I mean, they will ask from a basic question, and they will help you in answering. Okay. So, it's my experience, and the very good. I mean, I attended the TA for Bangalore. It's a for integrated PhD and as well as for PhD also. Integrated PhD means what I understood is for integrated PhD they asked me some questions from real analysis, but at that time I couldn't answer. They asked me some very good questions. They asked me from linear algebra. They asked me, but that around the exercises. But at that time I didn't get that. For PhD, when I went for PhD interview, they asked me some questions, some function. It was because they asked me for the mark sheets, the mark sheets of the previous semester. They saw that I had done my course in function analysis. But they started asking questions on function analysis. But even then, I couldn't answer most of the questions. I told him at that time my interview was not that good. But they only asked some basic questions, but then gradually they will start increasing the toughness of the question. But in between, they will help us. They don't want us to answer all questions, but what they will observe is that how we answer the questions or how we approach the question. And one more tip is that whenever they give you a question for interview, you write whatever comes to your mind, whatever theorems or whatever points comes to your mind, write it on the board. Okay. Then from that they can help you with doing that. Anyway, they will help you. They don't want you to. If you're, for example, if you're giving, they are asking a question, you're immediately giving an answer. That means they will understand that you have done that question previously. So there is no point in they cannot judge you because you have already done that question before and you are answering very fast. But suppose if you are a new question, that means a question that we have not attended before, and you are trying to do. If you are not able to complete the answer, they will help you. They will give you some hints, and with that, if you are able to answer it, then getting a position in TFR or such premier institutes, and so chances for getting such a position, premier institutes are there. So for that, what I suggest is you can for analysis you have more. You can refer any books. For analysis, you have Rudin, Bartle, And linear algebra you can refer Hoffman or any, I think Lang, I forgot the author's name, Serge Lang or something. You have to just read the concepts and try doing the exercises. Okay, try to enjoy doing the exercises, and then I think you mostly will get. Okay, that's all. You can ask me any questions.
Okay, Rahul, dear participants, feel free to ask questions or any comments. You're welcome. So we have a good participation from various parts of India. So please do ask questions or comment anything you wish to do.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Sir, I am Dia Shaha.
Okay.
I read in Ashutosh College, and I am in the third year of my BSc Maths honors
Okay.
degree.
Okay.
Sir, I have attended the whole session and solved the problems we have discussed. It's very good and very conceptual. Thank you, sir, for this great session.
Thank you
Sir,
for the comments.
can I ask one thing? Sir, I am solving the previous year questions. Is there any other book for the preparation of the exam?
See, only thing is, there is no some guidebooks or something like that. Only thing is, okay, if you do previous year questions, you'll get an idea, and you'll get lots of questions. TFR has very good number of questions. Very interesting questions. You think, it seems to be a very easy question, but when you try to answer each option by option, you start on answering the option. You start on whether each option is correct or wrong. You will learn the concepts behind it. What I suggest is you keep on doing the previous year question, whether it is TF or any entrance question you will get. And for answering each question, you can discuss with your friends, you can discuss with your seniors and all. Now we have this online platform. You can use WhatsApp or Facebook, anything. You have so many groups there. You can post questions in that. Along with that, what you have to do is you read. Okay, you are doing a question on continuity in real analysis. Okay. Now what you have to do, you see a question. So what you have to do is you take a standard test. You can take any test. You can take a Bartil or Rudin or whatever. You just check, you read that part continuous, what is continuous functions, what you try to do it. Okay, even then you are not getting, you can do another option. You try to Google that question. I mean, you just paste the question as such into Google. You either will get an answer. There are some websites that solve that answers. But if you're referring that website, if you're visiting that website, what is you have to understand the answer first given in that. They may not give you explanation. You have to understand that answer, and then you have to write the answer by yourself. That means you have to understand what are the arguments you are given, and then write the answer. So in that way also you can learn. Okay, in that way also you can learn. But I am not suggesting that for every question you should go. You mean you have to go and Google it. That's not a good practice. But you have to try it by yourself. And then if you are not getting it, you can Google it. At least if you are not getting an answer, you will get some hints for doing that question. You get some hints. Okay. In that way, you have to develop this. In that way, you have to develop the subject. Means not necessary that you have to get everything, but you have to keep on searching, and you have to keep on searching for hints, and that you discuss with your friends, you discuss with the teachers, and all. In such a way, you can prepare well. Okay, it's not I mean, you cannot do it like some within 1 month or 2 months. You should keep on doing it. Now you are third year, right? You can keep on doing it like this. I wish you all best. And some more questions I was Vaishnav PT, whether there is negative mark. So far for TFR there is no negative markings as such, as far as I know. So when I attended for integrated PhD, when I attended, it was in 2014. Out of 20, the cutoff was 11 marks. Out of 20 marks, it was 11 marks. But it was in 2014. Now it might have increased. The cutoff might have increased. And in 2016 for PhD, out of 30, the cutoff was around 24. Something like that, 24, 23 out of 30. So that was the case some few years ago, but regarding cutoff, we cannot say something like that because now the number of students attending these exams have increased. So cutoff can change accordingly. I think more than the written exam, you have to concentrate well on interview also. You have to understand the concepts and the panel, because the TFR panel will be the just thing. That #1 mathematicians of India, it will be. Such people will be in that TFR. Okay.
So
anyway,
they will consider the entrance exam only for scrutiny.
Yeah, scrutiny. Yes.
Okay. So
actually, one more experience. My supervisor actually he cleared once this TFR exam and went to TFR Bombay for interview. So to him, they asked him the same question that came for entrance exam, and at the end the same question they asked for the entrance exam, he gave a different answer, and then immediately they asked him that, but you have not written that answer for your exam. You answered differently. So they told me for him, they asked questions from he started asking questions from the entrance question paper that we have attended. It was in TFR Bombay, but I have attended both the interviews at TFR Bangalore campus. In TFR Bombay, there is only PhD, but in TFR Bangalore, there is integrated PhD as well as PhD.
Okay. So anyway, studying the good standard books and trying to understand the concepts well will be really helpful, not only for TAFR and also for other exams. And after MSc, you want to go for PhD entrances and all that. Okay. Yes, Palash, you can ask now.
We know that the cardinality of the set of naturals. My question is based on the number theory. So
okay.
We know the cardinality of the set of naturals is alpha naught. That is the smallest cardinal number. Cardinality. Smallest infinity, basically.
Okay, fine.
Basically, the Cantor's theorem denotes that we cannot get a bijection from that set to that power set. So
yes.
the power set of naturals, the cardinality is bigger than the set of naturals. So that's why we denote that cardinality. So at another symbol like that continuum C.
Yeah. Okay.
So now my question is, if we if we take a set of all primes basically the subset of naturals, set of all primes.
Okay.
Okay. So we also know that the prime gaps, the prime density goes lower when we take the higher order terms.
Okay.
So the number of primes is also lower than the number of the natural numbers, much more lower than.
Okay.
And Euclid and many mathematicians prove that the set of primes, that the number of primes are infinite. So is there another symbol for denote that the set of cardinality of the prime numbers?
See, I mean, my question is, you can have a you can have one map from bijection from set of natural numbers to set of primes. So the cardinality of the number of cardinality of prime number should be ILF node itself, right? Because the number of primes is infinite, and any infinite subset of natural numbers and the cardinality of natural numbers and the cardinality of any infinite subset of natural numbers should be the same. Because you can write it as a sequence, right? P1, P2, P3, etc.
Are you telling the function, the Euler zeta function and the harmonic series? That is the relation between the natural and primes.
Sorry, I don't know much things about this. I am not good at number theory, but the question is interesting. I am not aware of such things.
So this question arises in my mind that the prime density goes lower in the higher order terms, and there is also small gaps and large gaps, like the twin prime conjecture. There is infinitely twin prime conjecture. So the gap between that primes is 2. And
okay, even I think that that has nothing to do with the cardinality of prime numbers. I feel like that.
See, any infinite subset of natural numbers will have the same cardinality as of n, because you, as the Rahul told, you can list the element as a sequence.
I think he is trying to ask something else, I think.
I don't know what actually he means. I think he's feeling that number of primes is comparatively smaller than the number of natural numbers or something like that.
No, that is, I think it's something with distribution of prime numbers in the whole natural numbers.
Yes,
how
that kind of thing.
Yeah, you think of think of this rational number. You think of rational numbers. Okay, continue.
Okay, so I want to say there should be another symbol for the set of primes. Though the
okay. Yes, audible.
Okay, so we know that the prime density goes lower for the higher order terms, and there are infinitely many primes. And so the set of naturals and if we compare the set of natural and the set of primes, so there is a big difference, big difference. So their potential also not same. So I think we cannot denote that ALF node to denote the set of primes.
See, Palash, you are speaking of, what about the cardinality of rational numbers? Actually, they are dense in R, but set of natural numbers are not dense in R. Okay? Fine. But even then, set of natural numbers and set of rational numbers have same cardinality. Okay, so it's all dealing with the distribution of you consider real number, real line R. So I think it's
same. Yes, both are for infinite set. Every infinite set have the same cardinality, but there is some small cardinality and there is some big cardinality, big infinity. So that will ALF node is the smallest cardinality, smallest infinity.
I think that is equal to the cardinality of natural numbers. Not I think
yes,
it is equal to cardinality of natural numbers. So okay, how do you say the cardinality of a set, infinite set, is ALF node? If and only if you have a bijection from natural numbers, right?
Cardinality of infinite set is not ALF node. Cardinality of infinite sets. Hello.
Yes, please.
Yes. So every so cardinality of every like interval or something else is same always.
Okay.
But there is some difference, like the smallest infinity and the biggest infinity. So ALF node is the smallest and continuum is the biggest. So my question is there any other symbol to denote the set of primes that is also infinity as much more lesser than the set of naturals?
No, what I'm saying. Okay, sir, you can continue.
See, Palash, let me make something more clear. See, the primes are, it is an infinite subset of natural numbers, and also, therefore, it is a countably infinite subset. Any countably infinite subset can be put in one-to-one correspondence with the set of natural numbers, and therefore, they have the same cardinality. Okay. So, I don't know what the point you are arguing there. See, the cardinality will be the same. Okay.
Which function makes that bijection?
Yeah, you see, you can list the primes as a sequence, as an infinite sequence, and it is a subset of natural numbers. Therefore, it is a countably infinite subset of natural numbers, and therefore it will have the same cardinality. Okay. And you mentioned that C is the biggest cardinality. It is not right. There are infinitely many infinities. Okay. If you go for see, natural numbers, the cardinality is LF null. If you go for real numbers, the cardinality is the cardinality of the continuum C. If you go for the power set of R, you will get a bigger one. Okay. You can repeat that process so that you will get an infinitude of infinities. And there is one famous result, namely the continuum hypothesis, which says that any uncountable subset of R have the same cardinality of R. Okay, so the dealing with finite numbers and dealing with infinity is somewhat different.
I think you can read this in Simmons' book. Simmons' book has written this very beautifully. In the first chapter, it is the same point that Vinod sir told. These things are in Simmons' book. I have read in Simmons' book. When I don't know whether
topology and modern analysis.
Yeah, yes. I have read the same thing where Sir told. I have read this in Simmons' first chapter. I think first or second chapter. They have written all the concepts of set, cardinality of set, infinity, comparing how to compare two infinities, like cardinality of n and cardinality of R. I think Simmons has written very well in the book Modern Topology and Analysis. Modern.
Yes. Okay, other students, anything about today's class or anything about TAFR or PhD entrances?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Jasim from Kerala. At present, I'm studying BSc Mathematics third year at St. Joseph College, Devagiri, Calicut. So now I'm preparing for TAFR examination next week. So today's class was very informative for me, and all the questions you discussed so far, you have very beautifully explained all the concepts behind that question. So I have no doubt to say that today's class was very effective for me. So thank you so much, sir, and thank you to Vinod sir for giving me a chance to interact with sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasim.
I think we'll stop it or.
Yeah. Okay. If the participants, if you have no questions further, then we can wind up here. So somebody, okay, that you answered in the chat box itself, TFR Mumbai and TF Bangalore, it's okay. So let us wind up here. So we wish all the participants a great success in the forthcoming exams. And I hope that today's session was really useful for you in your final round preparations. So let me once again thank Dr. Rahul Rajan for being with us for this wonderful session. So, and also I express my thanks to all participants from all over India. We will share the PDF of these lectures through our WhatsApp groups, and also we will upload the recorded version of this class in our YouTube channel of Dr. Bijumon. So thank you everyone. Wish you all the best.
I also thank everyone, especially Vinod sir, for giving me an opportunity to do this class, and also thank all the participants for attending the lecture throughout. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you everyone. Let us wind up here. Thank you. Have a nice day.